Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Security Pill. This is 𝗘𝗾𝗂𝗵𝗲𝗃, Executive Editor of the Cyber Express. Along with us today is veteran CISO, a man of many hats, Mr. Aditya Mukherjee. Mr. Mukherjee, welcome to the chat. It's a pleasure having you over here because personally, it is great to meet and share your experience with us. You are a felicitated information security executive. You've been awarded CISO of the Year many times. What do you see as essential skills for a modern CISO?
Thanks for having me. So I think one of the most important factors for a successful CISO is that one needs to be driven as a person towards understanding the genuine landscape changes that are happening in the environment of information security. Pretty much every other day we have some new regulations kick in. We have some global mandates coming in from different governments. We have different kinds of attacks which are unveiled over a period of time. So it's very important that as a CISO, the person is forward-looking, someone who inculcates a strategic outlook, and primarily the ability to convert IT abstracts into the business context is very crucial, because the primary audience for the CISO is going to be non-IT folks, senior executives, board members who are not going to be very familiar with how information security works particularly. So it's very important to have good communication skills, good collaboration skills, and conflict management skills also come handy.
So you have seen the role of a security expert in all forms of corporate life. You've been an entrepreneur, you're a test engineer, and you were part of a global consultancy. What are some of the main areas of focus of a new security program? Like when you start from scratch.
Correct. So I would say starting from scratch requires first having a good policy in place, a good framework in place based on which you're creating those policies and procedures. If you talk about what should be the main focus for an organization to begin with, I would say it's to focus on tools and solutions and vendors which are best fit for the requirement of the organization based on either the current threat landscape that they have or the future threat landscape that they're expecting to have, or it might be based on the program maturity, the skill set that their resources have within the organization. Why I say this is because often I have seen that when an organization is scaling up or they're building a new infosec practice, they get into a buying frenzy where they are accumulating a lot of top tools which are in the market, and then they try to hire resources who are able to manage those tools. Instead, organizations should focus on first getting some kind of security assessment done or some kind of external audits done to understand what are the holes that they have in their security apparatus, and then ensure that they are only getting tools and procuring services to plug those holes and utilize those existing tools and capabilities to the best of their ability. One prime example would be AI, ML, and automation tools, which pretty much every organization has, but I can say really a few can say that they are utilizing it to the best of their abilities.
Okay. Speaking of security frameworks, when you took up your first job in cybersecurity, which was infosecurity then, security frameworks were glorified SOPs at that time. I mean, those were the days when security program itself was somewhat rudimentary. Based on your experience across all these years, where would you advise your organization to invest most time and effort? And what is that Achilles heel where most organizations fail?
I would say it's very important to get the foundation right. So as we spoke in the previous question, it's very important that you have a good framework in place. Examples would be either the NIST cybersecurity framework, any of the ISO 27000, etc. frameworks. If you're in a particular industry, you might be required by regulations to follow HIPAA or GDPR, etc. So having understanding of what is the bare minimum that you need to do as per the compliance and your industry requirements is going to be the first step, because if you don't do that, you're not going to be in compliance with the regulatory requirement, and that's going to attract fines and penalties, etc. So that's one. Once those things are done, any organization needs to understand first what kind of asset inventory they have, because if you don't know what you have, you really cannot protect it. So understanding what kind of assets you have, understanding what is the risk which can pertain to those assets, and ensuring that you have a plan to remediate those risks, either by mitigating it or reducing the risk. That really comes on the risk tolerance part. Thirdly, I would say, similar to understanding what assets you have, it's important to understand what is your dependency on third-party suppliers, supply chain, etc., because they are a crucial part of your organization, because they are either feeding information or services to you, and if those get disrupted, your end consumer and your service portfolio will get impacted. So I think that is a good place to start. Additionally, I would say organizations and CISOs specifically should ensure that they are getting audited through external assessor on a timely manner. That ensures that you can build that confidence with your board that someone else is coming in, auditing us and telling us that we are doing good, or these are the things that we need to improve on. And when you do that year on year, you show the improvement of the security posture and what ROI you are actually bringing in.
Okay. Speaking of which, I have two factors to discuss here. One is compliance, which is the very basis of a security architecture. But then, is compliance enough for complete security or bare minimum security? Compliance is just meeting the norms, right? Does it guarantee in any way that you've done your work?
It does not. So in the past few years, we have seen multiple companies which have passed their compliance checks and they have got certified, and even after that they have been attacked or breached. So compliance is the bare minimum that you should be doing. It's more of ticking the boxes that you have put certain controls in place or you have certain processes in place, but how well are those products working? How well are your processes working? How efficient those processes are to mitigate risk is something else which comes basically in the factor of due care, due diligence, and ensuring that you have good governance in place. That is why the term is known as GRC, governance and compliance are just a part of it. But the idea is to utilize all of these principles together to ensure that you have good oversight, as well as your tools, technologies are working effectively and your resource pool is trained adequately to utilize those tools to the best of their abilities.
Coming to the second point, the return of investment. The previous interviews in this series has given us the idea that CISOs love compliance because that helps them get the budgets right, get their schemes out and running, and get the nod of the board. Like how should I say? If they face the prospects of facing a legal penalty if the compliance process is not followed, the board usually says yes. But most of the time, CISOs fail to, or at least they try and not succeed completely in getting the ROI right. You have considerable experience in undertaking executive oversight and accountability of an SOC. It also puts you directly in the position to explain your management, the cost and returns of your decisions. What advice would you share with other CISOs when it comes to communicating the ROI on security investments to other stakeholders, particularly the company board? how do they get their way out to them?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, because ROI is always top of the mind when you have an entire practice setup with a huge budget allocation. I would say first and foremost, having a senior executive or a board member who has some kind of information security experience or IT experience, or is knowledgeable about information security, or just simply appreciates the value that infosec brings to the business, is going to be indispensable, because that gives you a lot of sponsorship and support from initiatives that you would want to drive on. In case of absence of such a sponsor, which is quite expected, I would say a CISO needs to ensure that he opens dialogues to identify who that particular sponsor could be, with whom he can create a trust relationship, so that they can basically, support the programs going forward. Now, even if you have that support, you need to show the ROI. So at the end of the day, there are various frameworks that can be utilized to showcase the ROI in an infosec deployment. But the core principles remain the same, where you would like to show how the security posture is improving over a particular period of time. That can be either done by benchmarking your organization against your industry peers, or you can also utilize a way of plotting the number of security events, breaches, or just investigations that you have done over the past 6 months or a year. And we know that every breach, every security event, or every compromise has a corresponding dollar value or a rupee value associated with it. Where does that rupee value come from? It comes from the remediation efforts. It comes from the work hours that have to be spent to ensure that business is back up, and the potential downtime, the brand impact that the organization might face to the end customers or the end clients. So if we add all of this up, we can showcase that this particular incident or this particular attack was prevented due to these implemented security controls, and what is the value which is associated with it. So that is a very good way of showing to anyone who doesn't understand information security as to what you implemented and how you saved this much money for the organization as a whole.
Speaking of threats, based on your experience and insights, how are cyber attacks changing at the moment? Like at this time, what are the biggest threats companies need to focus on?
I would say every year, since we are towards the end of the year, every year we get this question as to what has been the top attack vectors in the past and how it would change in the future. I would say currently where we stand, a lot of companies are looking towards either utilizing cloud services or moving their on-premise solutions and services to the cloud. So cloud vulnerabilities and cloud specific attacks are definitely top of the mind. Outside of that, I think irrespective of which vertical you're from, social engineering attacks and ransomware attacks are always something that CISOs think about, because you have users who are primarily going to be targeted by these, and no matter how good your security awareness program is, there's always going to be some holes in the armor which need to be plugged. Outside of that, in the recent past, I personally feel that third-party attacks and supply chain attacks have also seen growth, which we might see in the coming year as well.
Okay. Speaking of holes in the armor, most of the vulnerabilities are found when a security audit happens. But most of the companies are a little hesitant when it comes to sharing their, security architecture details, unless it is a very trusted vendor. But these days, vendors are also getting hacked. So how do you maintain that confidentiality when you open up your access details to a third party? Is there a risk involved? I mean, there is a risk involved, but how do you manage that?
So as organizations, obviously, everyone's hesitant to share information either pertaining to an attack that they have faced, because then the question comes, were you able to protect the data, were you able to protect the integrity of your systems, etc. But I think overall we have a lot of industry driven forums which are operating specifically in the context of India. If we talk about, we have DSEI, we have 𝗖𝗍𝗃, we have 𝗖𝗍𝗃𝗲𝗵. So these provide a good platform where you can provide your data in a much more sanitized way, working with these particular forums itself, ensuring that you're not giving out information which is critical pertaining to your organization. At the same time, you're sharing information to ensure you can help the other industry peers, because at the end of the day, we see we have organizations such as FSISAC in US, we have different ISACs for different industries. The entire idea behind these is that these organizations from same industry can come together, share what they are seeing as potential attacks or persistent attacks, and everybody can protect themselves against those. A 𝗓𝗏𝑖n is also making some changes, as we have seen over the past year, and hopefully in the future we'll have more robust platforms where organizations can share either indicators of compromise or talk about different attacks that they are seeing, which can be shared and fostered forward for better cooperation.
Fine. Such an umbrella organization for industry audit, security audit is a good idea. Like, an annual general meeting without the presence of a company secretary. Likewise, a physical audit of accounts will not happen without the presence of a chartered accountant. So, is such a standardized security audit body possible, especially considering the ever-changing aspects of our industry? Security paradigms are changing, the threats are changing. So, in this scenario, is such a centralized umbrella organization for infosecurity audit possible? Do you think so?
I think there's a lot of moving pieces and complexities in that. So in the near future, I don't see something coming up. However, it is definitely something that anybody who's working in the industry would want to see, because that helps us standardize the expectations as well as the deliverable outcomes. But as we said, getting just an audit, getting just a compliance would not be the end goal. These are good starting points where organizations can identify what needs to be fixed and what is the expected controls that should be in place. However, in the moment, I think the industry is very scattered with respect to what they want to follow as a framework or what audits they need to go through as per the required mandates of the vertical or the industry paradigm. In the future, if we have some centralized way of doing it, I think that will be a great move.
Okay. Digressing a bit here, I would like to ask a personal query. I'm curious about a term that I've been hearing quite often in the CISO circle, integrity. What do you think about when you hear the word integrity, particularly system integrity? How important is that in security compliance or just operation for that matter?
I think at the bare basics of information security, we have the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And integrity basically stands for the expectation that a system would perform as its intended functions. So things should work as they are intended to. So I would say majorly the kind of attacks that we see are network vulnerabilities, software vulnerabilities, poor configuration management, even flaws within the security architecture can lead to compromise of the integrity of the systems. I think why we are hearing this a lot is probably because at the end of the day, we want to ensure that our systems, our environments, and our companies are resilient. Not just from a cyber perspective, but also from an operational perspective. And if an end user is supposed to click something which is add to cart and then go and order that item, they should be able to do it without any hindrances or any unexpected manipulations in the system. So for information security, it remains a primary factor.
Going back to one of our earlier points, like you mentioned that a presence of a security person in the company board would be helpful for CISOs to get the security budget right, get the security posture right. That demand has been going on for quite some time. But unfortunately, based on our perspective, company boards are usually this gentleman's club where either the pals of the company founder chairman or the funds that have invested in are occupy key positions. Have you ever seen a change, like companies proactively taking initiative to appoint an info security board of directors?
I would say if my memory serves right, only a handful that I've seen in the Indian ecosystem where someone has come in as a advisory board executive or has been appointed to the board to specifically cater to cybersecurity or information security in mind. Largely, as you rightly said, we continue to see people with strong business acumen, people with strong management skills and financial acumen occupying those seats. And that's largely because that from an Indian ecosystem, we still have a lot of change to see when we compare ourselves to either the Western countries or companies which are more globally present and they see information security as a primary factor. I would say change is slow, but however, we are seeing that. For example, for the first time in a decade, we are seeing the CISOs becoming senior executives being reported through the company website or in their different board initiatives where CISOs are getting a say in the boardroom, which wasn't the case many years back. So I think change is there. I think some kind of regulatory requirements from the government would definitely help fast-pace that we have someone from an information security. Even in the government, if you see the Ministry of Cybersecurity and all of the different integrated parts that we have, there's a lot of expectations that things will get streamlined and things will actually see a central division to be formed, which will help us. I think with those changes, with the invocation of CERT coming into play and advising organizations as to how they should involve security professionals at senior executive levels, will definitely help us.
That opens up a whole different topic of regulatory intervention and company boards, but that's for another day. Thank you for that concise and informative talk. To sum it up, what are the key cyber threats for organization businesses right now? What are the main challenges that CISOs face, rather?
I would basically divide it into technical and non-technical. So talking about the technical part, shadow IT or the growing threat landscape is something that every time I speak with a CISO, this topic comes up because as I said, we need to know what our assets are, where our assets are, how critical those assets are, and what is the risk pertaining to them. So understanding your landscape, understanding the shadow IT part is important. At the same time, cyber threats are evolving every day, as we spoke in the starting. We have new threats come in, we have innovative threats coming in. So for a CISO to stay on top of all of these changes is very important. It's also important to ensure that your user base is aware of these security threats, such as either looking at social engineering attacks such as phishing emails, or looking at endpoint security attacks such as ransomware, etc. So these are the technical ones. I would say from a non-technical perspective, looking at the constant budget constraints is something that CISOs have to be very cognizant about.
True, very true.
Looking at I won't say talent shortfall or lack of talent, but talent which is required. So if you have a specific tool, getting talent which is well versed with that tool and is able to do what you're looking for is something which is not an easy fit in any market. So that's another. Lastly, I would say looking at the compliance requirements and etc., such as the recent certain requirements. I think pretty much every security professional had read about it, thought about it, and contemplated how they would comply with it. So these things keep happening. It will happen in 2022. It has happened in 2022. It will happen in 2023 as well. So these are going to be constant, cat and mouse game for us.
That was really informative, Mr. Mukherjee. That was. Thank you for your time. We'll catch up in another session of Security Bill from Cyber Express. This is 𝗘𝗾𝗵𝗁𝗃 signing off.